Hey, this is Mike Schmitz, and these are my sermon notes from January 8th, 2023. First thing my pastor was talking about was the importance of vision, and how when you have a vision, that is the thing that allows you to beat discouragement. I know I've experienced that in my own life. Whenever I feel like I'm not being effective, it's because I lack a vision, and there's so many different verses that talk about that in the Bible, but that was just kind of like a precursor to the rest of his message, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time there. The big thing he was talking about was Genesis 4:26. At the end of this verse, it says, "At that time, people began to call upon the name of the Lord." And as I'm recording this, and as my pastor preached this message, there was a very scary incident that happened on Monday Night Football with Damar Hamlin, who was the safety for the Buffalo Bills. He collapsed on the field. They had to administer CPR, and as I'm recording this, it sounds like he's going to be released from the hospital in a couple of days, but the first responders basically saved his life. When that happened, it was obviously very scary, and you could see a lot of the players were very emotional, and it was kind of interesting because everyone was talking about pray for this guy. And yeah, 100%, I agree with that, but all of the political correctness went out the window. And if you saw the field, all the players were kneeling down around the 50-yard line as the ambulance comes out there, and they were praying. There was no concern about, well, is someone going to be offended by this? And even the social avatars for the NFL and the teams were changed to hashtag pray for Damar. So it's kind of an interesting point in time because we tend to manufacture this belief that our culture is just so anti everything Christian, and in a lot of ways they are, but really, if we just worry about our own stuff, if we call on God ourselves, we don't really have to worry about what anybody else is doing. We don't have to try to convince anybody else. We just have to do what God has told us to do. Kind of the next verse here, Pastor was talking Malachi 3:7-10. These are familiar offering scriptures, but this says, "From the days of your fathers you have turned aside from my statutes, have not kept them. Return to me, and I will return to you, says the Lord of hosts. But you say, how shall we return? Will man rob God? You are robbing me. But you say, how have we robbed you? In your tithes and contributions. You are cursed with a curse, for you are robbing me, the whole nation of you. Bring the full tithe into the storehouse. There may be food in my house. Thereby put me to the test, as the Lord of hosts. If I will not open the windows of heaven for you, pour down a blessing until there is no more need." And my pastor was talking about continuing the theme he started last week about how God wants our lives to be living proof, right? He doesn't want you to be blessed so that everyone can look, oh, look at that guy, right? But he wants you to be blessed so that you can be a blessing. He wants you to help other people. He wants you to get other people saved. That's another thing he said. Going back over to the left here, he mentioned that the church is the ark. The church is the place through which salvation comes, because Jesus isn't here. We are, and we're supposed to gather together in accordance with the model that he set forth, which is through the local church. That is the vehicle. And I think it's very important that you're connected to a local church. I believe that your pastor is anointed for your life like nobody else is. So just like as a parent, I am anointed for my kids. I can see things that other people are not going to be able to see. And I have insight into why they do certain things or how they're receiving certain things. I believe your pastor is anointed that way by God. You don't get to necessarily just pick wherever you want to go. You need to be in the right place. You also need to be seed-minded, not need-minded. And this is another thing my pastor mentioned. I just thought this was great. This really stood out to me. Genesis 8:22, I believe, talks about seed time and harvest. And from the perspective of giving, we need to be planting seed into the ground so that we can have a harvest. But his main point here was just don't focus on everything that's going wrong. And when you're praying, you shouldn't be asking God to do this for me, do this for me. You should be asking you should be putting seed into the ground, right? You should be doing things consistently that are going to produce a harvest of righteousness in your life. And prayer was a big thing that he was focusing on here. He talked about how character discipline is how you grow. It's the things that you do consistently that produce growth. It's not what you do once in a while. It's not going to the right conference. It's not being in the right meeting. It's being consistently where God wants you to be, receiving and growing in your Christian faith, Christian walk. Another thing my pastor has said over and over and over again is pray intently and obey precisely. I drew these two things here because prayer, we tend to think of this as we are maybe internally receiving what God is saying for our lives, but then we have to take action on it. So we have to receive and then we have to do something with it. It's not enough just to pray. You have to pray and then you have to obey. Faith without works is dead. There has to be some action associated with what God has told you to do. It can't just be something that you heard that makes you feel good. You have to take action on it. And I believe that this ultimately, going back over here to the left, this is another thing my pastor talks about. Focus brings fire. This was something that I jotted on. He was talking about the power of focus, but the fire part is the thing that kind of God spoke to me. When you've got a magnifying glass, what it does is it focuses the sun's energy. If I took a 100-watt light bulb and I just held it real close to something, it's not going to do anything. It's just going to be warm. It's going to produce a little bit of heat. But when you concentrate the power of the sun, for example, through a magnifying glass, I don't know if anybody did this when you were kids frying ants on the sidewalk. I mean, that sounds kind of bad, but that's an example of the power of the concentrated light, right? A laser is concentrated light. And when you have a vision and you're able to focus the vision and be specific on the thing that God has told you to do, that's really where the power is. And then ultimately, you have to just do what God has told you to do. The last thing my pastor mentioned here, Genesis 12, this is the story of Abram before he becomes Abraham. He says, "Now the Lord said to Abram, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. And I will make of you a great nation. I will bless you, make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." But Abram had to go. He didn't know where he was going, which is really kind of crazy when you think about it. Especially for me, I tend to like to have all the things mapped out, know exactly what's going to happen. Right? That's not what Abram got from God. He didn't get a very detailed plan. He just said, "This is the direction. Now you start walking." And that's kind of scary, but ultimately that's the thing that unlocked the blessing in his life. That's how God got him to where he needed to be so that he could be very rich, so that he could be a blessing to everyone that he came in contact with. And the whole earth is going to be blessed through him, right? But he had to walk it out in faith because God didn't tell him this is exactly how it's going to happen. And I feel like that's my own life too. God is telling me I need to do these things, but he doesn't give me the point-by-point plan. And this is what it's going to look like when you get there. He just shows me the next step. And that's what faith is it's taking the next step, trusting that as you do that, the path forward is going to become clear because God is a good father and he's going to show you where you're supposed to be. He's going to put you in a position to succeed, just like a football coach puts his players in a position to succeed. That's what God wants to do for you. So those are my sermon notes. Hope you enjoy them.